Wyoming Territory, May of 1887, the sky cracked open with thunder as Elira Vance stumbled across the muddy clearing behind the broken-down chapel on the edge of Buffalo. Her white wedding dress dragged behind her, soaked and dirt-stained, clinging to her legs like a shroud. Rain hit her face, but she could barely feel it. Her left arm burned from where Owen Talbert, her groom, had grabbed her and yanked her down the steps of the church in front of the whole town. "You think you can embarrass me in front of everyone," he had hissed, gripping her harder when she tried to pull away. "You're mine now, Elira. You said I do." But she had not. The words had stuck in her throat when she stood at the altar, staring at his cruel eyes. And when she hesitated, Owen had clenched her wrist and dragged her outside like a misbehaving dog. She fell into the mud, hands sinking into the wet earth. Her veil was torn, her hair pulled loose from its pins. She heard boots behind her, fast and heavy, and braced herself. "Let go of her." The voice cut through the rain like a rifle shot. Elira looked up, blinking water from her eyes. A tall man stood between her and Owen, soaked to the bone but steady as a stone wall. He wore a wide-brimmed hat, dark with rain, and a brown duster clung to his lean frame. His hand rested on the butt of a holstered Colt, but he had not drawn it. Owen laughed, sharp and mean. "This ain't your business, cowboy." The stranger stepped forward. "It is now." Owen made a move toward Elira again, but the cowboy caught her arm first gently, like she might break if he held too tight, and pulled her up onto her feet. He did not let go. "Back off," the cowboy said again, lower this time. "She's not going anywhere with you." Owen's lip curled. "You got no right." The stranger finally drew his Colt, not raised, just enough that Owen saw he was not bluffing. Owen spat into the mud, threw a last glare at Elira, and turned around. "Fine," he muttered. "Keep her, you'll wish you hadn't." He stormed off, boots slapping through the mud. Elira stood frozen, her arm still held in the cowboy's hand. He let go slowly, like he was afraid she might fall again. "You all right?" he asked, voice quiet now. She nodded, though her teeth were chattering. "I think so." He offered his coat. She hesitated, then let him drape it over her shoulders. "Name's Xalen Oakes," he said. "I run cattle west of town." "Elira Vance," she said faintly. "I was supposed to get married today." "Supposed to," he echoed, "but you did not." She shook her head. "I changed my mind." Xalen nodded once, like that was reason enough. "You got somewhere to go," she hesitated. "No, my parents passed last year. The house was sold. I was staying with the pastor's wife until the wedding." Xalen looked out toward the road. "Come with me, I have a small ranch." "You can stay there a few days until you figure out what's next." Elira blinked. "You do not even know me." He met her eyes. "I saw enough to know you did not deserve what he did, and I do not leave women in the mud." Something in his voice steadied her. She nodded. "All right." They rode in silence most of the way. She sat behind him on his horse, holding his waist, the coat wrapped tight around her. The storm passed as they reached the edge of his land, and the sun broke through, catching on the wet grass. His ranch was small but neat, a two-room cabin, a barn, a fence that needed mending. He helped her down, opened the door, and lit a lantern inside. "You can take the bed," he said. "I will sleep out here by the stove." "I cannot take your bed," she said. He gave her a look. "You need it more than I do." That night, she lay under a wool blanket, listening to the soft clink of him cleaning his gun by the fire. She had not felt safe in weeks. She did now. The next morning, she woke to the smell of coffee and bacon. She stepped out of the bedroom in one of his shirts, her dress drying by the fire. "You cook too?" she asked. He looked up from the skillet. "Better when I am not nervous," she smiled. Something in her chest eased. They spent the next few days slowly learning each other. He fixed the fence while she helped muck the stalls. He taught her how to saddle a horse, and she showed him how to mend a torn shirt. She did not talk about Owen, and he did not ask. But sometimes she saw him watching her hands, the bruises still faint on her arm. On the fifth morning, she found him outside, hammering a nail into a new gate. "I want to stay," she said. He looked up. "You sure?" "I am. I want to work. I want to earn my place here." He stepped down from the fence and crossed to her. "You already have one." She looked into his eyes. "You never let go of my arm, back at the church." "I was afraid you would fall again," he said. "I was already on the ground," she whispered. "But you still held on." He reached up and tucked a strand of hair behind her ear. "I will keep holding on," he said. She leaned in, and he met her mouth gently, like she was something wild he did not want to startle. But when she kissed him back, he wrapped his arms around her and pulled her close. And for the first time, Elira did not feel dragged or claimed or owned. She felt chosen. She kissed him again, and this time neither of them let go. The wind had a soft whistle to it that morning, brushing over the grass like a lullaby. Elira stood at the edge of the paddock, one hand resting on the top rail, her boots sunk firm into the dirt. In front of her, a young sorrel mare sidestepped nervously, ears twitching. "She ain't been handled much," Xalen said from beside her, holding a bridle in one hand and a coiled lead in the other. "Bought her off a trapper who didn't have the time or the patience." Elira studied the mare's eyes. "She doesn't trust hands yet. Not many do when they've only known the wrong ones." Elira didn't answer, but she reached out slowly, palm open. The mare flinched, then stilled. Her nose touched Elira's fingers, and she waited, letting the animal decide. From the corner of her eye, she saw Xalen watching not the horse, but her. Later, he helped her hang linens to dry. She stood on a stool, pinning a damp sheet to the line that stretched between the cabin and the barn. Her sleeves were rolled, her hair damp from washing. She held a wooden clothespin in her teeth and passed another to him. "I thought you'd leave by now," he said after a pause. She secured the corner of the sheet. "Did you want me to?" "No," she stepped down. "There's still plenty to do around here," he nodded. "That's true," she glanced at him. "But that's not why I stayed." He looked down at the clothespins in his hand, then set them on the fence rail. "I know." The sun cast long shadows by late afternoon. Elira sat on the porch steps, darning a tear in one of her stockings with tight, practiced stitches. Xalen returned from the far pasture, his shirt stuck to his back with sweat, a long-handled shovel slung over one shoulder. He paused at the edge of the porch. "You sew like you've done it your whole life." "My mother taught me." She didn't look up. "She said a woman ought to know how to fix what's torn, even when it's not her who broke it." He sat beside her, silent for a moment. "You speak plain." "I only started to." She tied off the thread and bit it clean. Her fingers brushed his as she passed the stocking to him. He didn't move his hand away. "What did you want back then?" he asked, her brow furrowed. "Before the wedding, before Buffalo, what did you want for yourself?" She leaned back, her voice low. "A place where I wasn't being watched. Somewhere I could speak without worrying what would come of it." He nodded. "You have that here if you want it." "I do." That night they didn't speak much. She made a stew from salted pork and early turnips, and he washed the dishes after, his hands steady in the basin. She sat nearby, mending a torn saddlebag she'd found in the barn. The fire cracked quietly. When it was time to sleep, he took his blanket and went to the far side of the room like always. She watched him lie down near the cold stove, his hat pulled low over his face. "Xalen," she said softly. He tilted the hat up. "Would you rather take the bed tonight?" He studied her face a long moment. "No," he said, "but I'll keep sleeping here until you ask me not to." She nodded once. "All right." The lantern burned low, casting long shadows on the walls. She lay down and listened to the quiet breathing across the room. Something inside her that had been tight for so long began to loosen. In the days that followed, they worked together without needing to explain themselves. She learned the rhythms of his land, the way the light shifted over the hills at dusk, the sound of the well rope creaking in the morning, the way he whistled low and tuneless when he was thinking. One afternoon, she found a battered fiddle case tucked behind the shelf where he kept spare nails and lamp oil. She opened it with care. The instrument inside was old but well kept, the strings fresh. "You play?" she asked when he stepped inside. He hesitated. "Used to?" "Why'd you stop?" He wiped his hands on a cloth, his eyes avoiding hers. Didn't feel like there was anyone left to play for. She set the case on the table. "There is now." He met her gaze, and something shifted between them. No words, just recognition. That night he played. Just a single tune, slow and a little uneven, but the melody carried through the cabin like wind through cottonwood. Elira sat quietly, her knees drawn up to her chest, listening as if the song might stitch together all the things they hadn't said yet. When he finished, there was no applause. Only the soft settling of silence. "You're better than you think," she said. He looked down at the fiddle in his hands. "You make me want to be." She stood and crossed the room. He rose too carefully, like sudden movement might break the quiet. Her hand touched his chest, and she felt the breath catch beneath it. He leaned in, not fast, not bold, just sure. Their lips met like a promise spoken without words, and when they parted, she stayed close, her forehead resting against his. "I won't run," she whispered. "I wouldn't let you," he said, his arms encircling her like home. The first frost came early, silvering the grass before dawn. Elira stood at the woodpile with an axe in hand, splitting cedar into clean halves. Her sleeves were rolled high, fingers red with cold. She'd taken to the task without asking, and though the rhythm was new to her, each swing landed straighter than the last. The wind tugged at her braid and sent a curl loose across her cheek. She brushed it back with the back of her wrist and kept working. Xalen stepped out of the barn with a yoke slung over his shoulder, 2 buckets filled from the creek hanging at either side. He paused when he saw her, boots crunching over brittle leaves. "You don't have to do that." "I know," she said, not looking up. "But I'm doing it anyway." He said nothing more, just watched as she drove the axe down again, splitting the log clean in 2. Inside, she stacked the kindling neatly beside the hearth. A stew simmered low, thick with barley and the last of the carrots from the garden. She tasted the broth with the tip of a spoon and added a pinch of salt from the small tin behind the stove. Her hands moved with quiet purpose, her body finding a rhythm to the house that no longer felt borrowed. Xalen came in behind her, shaking off the chill. He set the buckets down and hung his coat near the door. "Guy from Ucross rode through," he said. "Said the Talbert boy's been sniffing around town again, asking after you." Elira turned from the stove, her face unreadable. "Did he say why?" He didn't have to. She leaned her hip against the counter. "You think he'll come out here?" Xalen dried his hands on a rag. "If he does, he won't get far." She met his eyes. "I don't want you in trouble because of me." "You're not trouble," he said. "You're here, and that's all that matters." She stepped closer, something flickering in her expression. "I used to think I'd have to live quiet, not speak too loud, not take up too much room." He reached for her hand, his voice steady. "You don't have to be small here." That night, she left the door open a little longer before latching it. The wind had quieted and the stars were sharp above the tree line. In the distance, a coyote called once, then fell silent. She stood on the porch with a shawl wrapped around her shoulders, her breath curling in the air. Xalen joined her, his hand resting near hers on the railing. "You ever think about leaving Wyoming?" she asked. "Used to," he said. "Back when I thought there was nothing here for me. And now," he looked at her then, full and steady, "now I think I was waiting." She let the silence stretch between them, soft and full. Then she reached for his hand. Inside, they moved through the dark cabin with ease. She lit a single lantern, its glow brushing the walls in amber. He poured water into the basin for her to wash, and she peeled off her shawl and sleeves, rubbing warmth into her arms. He stood behind her, not touching, just watching her reflection in the small glass nailed above the washstand. "You're not afraid of being seen anymore," he said. "I'm still learning," she replied. He stepped closer. "You don't have to learn alone." She turned and reached up to touch his collar, her fingers slow and sure. "Then stay with me tonight." He didn't answer, only leaned in and kissed her, not with caution but with certainty. The kind that comes when 2 people have already chosen each other in 100 small ways. The wind outside rose, then fell. Inside, the fire burned low, steady and warm. By morning, the world outside was crusted with frost, but the cabin was full of heat. Elira stirred awake beneath the quilt, the scent of wood smoke in her hair. Xalen was already up, moving quietly in the kitchen. She heard the scrape of a chair, the rustle of paper. She wrapped the blanket around her and stepped into the next room. He looked up from a folded map on the table. "There's land north of here. Some folks moved out when the mining dried up. Old place there near Cottonwood Creek. Needs work." She glanced down at the map, then back at him. "You thinking of buying it?" "I'm thinking of building something. With you if you want." Elira didn't answer right away. She walked to the window, looked out at the white grass, the fence lines, the barn leaning just slightly from age, then she turned and faced him. "I want to build something too." He stood, and she crossed the room into his arms. There were no vows, no gathered crowd, no preacher to speak words over them, just the quiet certainty of 2 people who had already chosen. The winter would be hard. The land would need tending. But they would face it together, no dragging, no breaking, no letting go. Only the steady, rising warmth of a life fully joined. By mid-November, the snow came down heavy and stuck hard. The cabin roof groaned under its weight, and the road into town vanished beneath drifts. Elira stood by the window, arms crossed over her chest, watching the pale world outside. Her breath fogged the glass, and behind her, the fire popped and hissed in the hearth. Xalen came in from the lean-to, brushing snow off his shoulders. His gloves were stiff with cold, and ice clung to the hem of his coat. He set a parcel on the table, a burlap-wrapped bundle tied with twine. "Elk jerky," he said, pulling off his gloves. "Traded with a Lakota man passing through. Said the herds moved down early this year." She turned from the window. "That'll last us a while." "I figured it might," he said, unwrapping the parcel and portioning it into a tin. "He asked after your name." Her brow lifted. "Did you tell him?" "I did." "He said he'd heard about what happened in Buffalo." Elira's jaw tightened. "I suppose word travels faster than horses." "He didn't speak with judgment." Xalen paused. "Said his sister left her betrothed too, for different reasons." But he understood. She sat down beside the stove, her hands resting in her lap. "I used to think women like that were reckless. Now I think maybe they were brave." He knelt beside her and offered a strip of meat. She took it, chewing slowly. "We've made it through the worst of first snow," he said. "Still have enough salt, flour, and beans to see through December. I'll ride out for more if the weather holds." She looked at him. "I've been thinking about spring." "What about it?" "There's a parcel of land east of here beyond the ridge. It's flat and the soil's dark. Might keep a garden there, maybe some chickens." His face softened. "You want that?" "I do. I want to plant something that starts with my hands." "Nothing passed down, nothing forced." He nodded. "We'll clear it when the thaw comes." Outside, the wind picked up again, pushing snow across the fields in low, drifting curls. Inside, the warmth of the fire reached their skin, but it was the stillness between them that filled the space more completely. That night, she opened the small cedar box her mother had left her, the one she hadn't looked inside since the funeral. Inside lay a folded scrap of muslin, a thimble, and a worn letter tied with blue thread. She sat at the table, the lantern casting a narrow halo across the page as she read. Xalen came in from stabling the mare. His hands were raw from cold, his cheeks red. She looked up from the letter and folded it slowly. "Did you know your mother well?" she asked. He hung his coat. "She died when I was 16. Taught me to ride, to read, and not to lie." "She sounds like someone who would have seen through most men." "She did," he said, and his eyes lingered on hers. "But she would have liked you." Elira's voice was low. "My mother used to say, find a man who doesn't turn away when things go silent." Xalen moved to stand behind her, his hand resting lightly on her shoulder. "I don't mind the quiet," he said. She reached up and covered his hand with hers. In the days that followed, the rhythm of their life settled with the snow. He repaired the boot heel she'd cracked on the porch step, hunched over his bench with a curved awl and a quiet patience. She pressed dried herbs into jars and stitched new cuffs onto his work shirt from a bit of flannel she'd found in the saddle trunk. They didn't speak about love. They didn't have to. One morning, a letter arrived, delivered by a ranch boy on snowshoes. It bore the stamp of the county courthouse. Xalen opened it by the stove, his fingers steady despite the chill. His eyes scanned the page once, then again. "What is it?" Elira asked. He passed it to her. "It's from the magistrate. Owen Talbert signed annulment papers in town. No contest. No claim." She read the letter, her chest rising with a shallow breath. "I didn't expect he'd let go so easy." "He didn't," Xalen said, "but he's done now." She folded the paper and set it aside. "Then I'm free," she said. He looked at her, his voice low. "You always were." She stepped toward him, snowlight catching in her hair. "But now there's no shadow, no one else's name tied to mine." He said nothing, just reached for her hand and brought it to his chest. "I want to be yours," she said. He wrapped both arms around her, and she pressed her face to his shoulder. "You already are," he said. Outside, the world lay white and still. Inside, they stood in the heart of their quiet cabin, the fire burning slow behind them, and the long winter no longer felt like something to endure. It felt like something to share. The thaw began at last in the third week of March, slow and stubborn. Snow pulled back from the fence posts in ragged patches, and the creek behind the cabin ran louder each morning, breaking free beneath its crust of ice. When the first green shoots pushed up through the soil near the porch steps, Elira crouched to touch them, her fingers brushing damp earth. She stood slowly, wiping her hands on her skirts, and looked out toward the rise where she'd said she wanted to plant. Xalen was by the barn, stripping old nails from a disassembled gate. His sleeves were rolled, and a line of sweat darkened the back of his shirt despite the chill still in the air. He glanced toward her as if he'd felt her watching. "I think it's time," she said. He set the hammer down and walked over. "We'll clear it together." They worked side by side for 6 days, cutting back brush and hauling rock. Elira's hands blistered, and she wrapped them in linen, then worked anyway. She never asked for rest, and Xalen didn't offer it unless she faltered. When they paused for water, they stood close, leaning against the same shovel handle or tree trunk, speaking little. It was a kind of quiet that didn't press or weigh down, it just held. On the 7th morning, she woke before him and watched the light stretch across the wood floor. His back rose and fell in the bed beside her, slow and even. She reached out and brushed her fingers along his ribs, gentle as breath. He stirred, then turned toward her with a low hum in his throat. "Your side of the bed's cold," he said. "I was thinking about a name," she replied. He blinked off sleep. "For the garden, for the place." He sat up, resting his elbows on his knees. "We never spoke about claiming it official." "I know," she said, "but I want to, not just the land." "You and me." He turned fully to face her, the morning light catching in the hollows of his face. "You want to marry," she nodded, "but not in a church, not with paper, just you and me, saying it plain." He reached for her hand and kissed the knuckles one by one. "Then let's say it." They stood beneath the cottonwood at the edge of the field that afternoon, the wind threading through the branches like a hymn. She wore her mother's brooch at her collar, and he'd shaved that morning with care. They stood close, hands linked, boots pressed into the thawed earth. "I have no vows written," she said. "Don't need them," he replied. "Just truth." She looked up at him. "I want to carry your name because I chose it. I want to share the work and the quiet and the years. I want to be the first face you see in the morning and the last at night." His fingers tightened around hers. "I want to build something with you that doesn't wear out. I want to listen when you need silence and stand beside you when the world gets loud. I want to be the place you come back to." They sealed it with a kiss, slow and steady, and when they pulled apart, neither looked away. That spring, they planted rows of beans, squash, and potatoes. Xalen repaired the roof, and Elira traded with a passing settler woman for 3 hens and a rooster. She sang while she churned butter and laughed when the rooster tried to chase her from the coop. He carved her a stool from pine so she could sit near the stove without crouching. She carved her name and his into the underside with the tip of his pocket knife. The land responded to their hands. By midsummer, the garden was thick with green, and the hens laid regular. Xalen built a second room off the back of the cabin, and Elira lined its shelves with dried herbs and jars of preserved jam. They hosted 2 neighbors for supper one evening, and the cabin filled with the scent of roast meat and cider. In August, Elira found herself pausing longer at the basin in the early morning, one hand resting low on her belly. She waited 3 weeks before she told him. He was at the stream, washing dust from his arms. She came barefoot across the grass, her steps hesitant. When he saw her face, he stood and dried his hands on his trousers. She placed his hand over the soft curve just beginning beneath her apron. He didn't speak, just held her and breathed against her neck for a long time. When he finally pulled back, his eyes were wet. "You sure?" he asked. "I'm sure." They didn't speak of what came before, of the fear that once lived in her voice or the way he used to watch the road for signs of trouble. Those things faded the way winter does, quietly, slowly, without a single moment marking their end. What remained was the pulse of daily life, shared coffee, fence repairs, laughter from the porch as dusk settled in. That winter, the cabin stood firm. The baby came in early February, after a long night of labor and soft prayers whispered into the crook of Xalen's shoulder. A girl, with dark hair and lungs that filled the room. They named her Willa. He held her first, rough hands cradling her like something sacred. Elira watched from the bed, her body hollowed and full all at once. "You've got her eyes," he said. "She'll have your stillness," she replied. Willa grew quick and strong. By the time she was walking, she knew the sound of her father's boots and the scent of her mother's hands. She picked wildflowers in spring and helped gather kindling in fall. Her laughter rang through the trees and across the fields, and every night she fell asleep between them beneath a quilt Elira had stitched by hand. Years passed. The garden grew larger. Xalen built a porch swing, and Elira taught Willa how to tie knots and read the sky for signs of rain. They never left the land they'd claimed. They didn't need to. They stayed, not because they had no other place to go, but because they'd built one worth staying for. And in that place, beneath the cottonwoods, in a home made of cedar and shared breath, they lived whole and together, warmed by the slow burning fire of love that had been chosen, not chased. A love that asked nothing but truth and gave everything in return.